Hello there, Sarah from 17 once again. This is my Give Me God of War walkthrough. We're of course on the hardest difficulty, and we've transitioned from the top of the mountain with the ogre into the Alfheim realm. We're coming here for some light so that we can get past the Black Breath, but at the moment in time I don't think we quite understand that, so we're going to be pushing forward and seeing the fallout of this battle here. So this is an area that early on in the game can be incredibly frustrating. You're going to be coming up against new enemy types, and they're going to fight a little bit differently to what you're used to. At this moment in time you're used to quite aggressive, quite relentless, quite heavy hitting enemies, where these guys aren't. They run away, they back up, they are very evasive, very elusive, and they have the ability to blind you, which I think you might have been able to be blinded by the ogre if you got unfortunately hit. So this is a status effect that's going to plague you in this game, just because that's the way it's designed, and it's very powerful. Do you see the explosion that creature just fired then? So the Dark Elves, what we're fighting right now, they have the ability to put these explosives in the ground, and when they go off they do a little bit of damage and you can't see. The damage doesn't mean much. The damage is inconsequential. I would probably think that if it did no damage, it would still be a tricky maneuver that they do, because not only does it blind you when it goes off and it makes Kratos flinch, but they have this wonderful bullshit AI way of using that technique, because as you've noticed, they don't shoot you. They shoot where you're going to be, or they shoot around where you're moving, and it does this interesting thing which I can't quite understand or decide yet whether or not it's an input read, because when you're running to your left, strafing, they tend to fire just ahead of you, so that if you continue your path you'll walk into it. And it's one of those really interesting pieces of programming where you immediately feel it. It's not like one of those attacks that comes out super quickly and like, oh wow, that surprised me. It's that feeling of thinking that the computer is knowing what you're doing because it understands it at such a quick level. And that's what it feels like when they do that move. The good news is, it's been balanced in such a way that you don't really have to worry about not being able to react to it, because it's very fair. It's got a large amount of detonation time, and there's quite a long fuse, and it allows you to get on with it and get away from it. When the Dark Elves jump, they will always jump directly behind you. So all you have to do is use the quick turn if you want to use that. If your camera sensitivity is as high as mine, you don't need to, but it is a tool useful, and that's one of the great uses of it. Whenever they jump, they will never jump to your left, they will never jump to your right, they will always be behind you. So, unless they're jumping backwards, that's a different thing though. But there's your introduction to the new enemy type, and as you witnessed, my strategy for them is the same as we've been using for the standard Draugrs. I freeze them with the axe, and then I proceed to try and do wall splat damage with them, get some collision, or I proceed to try and knock them off. If that doesn't work, I use the Executioner's Cleave. They're an intimidating enemy that I feel like have been either made easier or I've got better at them. I think it's probably more so the first thing. The second thing is just what's going to happen, and there's a lot of stuff to talk about in this game, and there's a lot of stuff I'm no doubt going to forget to talk about, which is unfortunate, but I am afforded a large amount of time because this is going to be a long walkthrough, and I hope I can cover as much of the information that I want to share that can help you have an easier time. And here is the other dwarf. So we're going to be doing, every time you see me run up to a blacksmith like that, it doesn't mean that I'm not doing things or changing my armor or crafting things and enchanting things and all that kind of fun stuff. I am doing it, I'm just saving it for not the walkthrough basically. I'm removing those parts so that you don't have to watch too much of it. And speaking of parts I might forget to talk about, which are incredibly important, when you enter this lake here, you want to swim over here to your right. You'll notice that this is the first real time I'm showing boat in the game. I've been deleting these sections and editing them together. The reason I've showed you this little path here is because this is probably the most important thing you need to pick up for this walkthrough. There is a fight in front of you here with a couple of tassel worms, but you don't have to worry because they're only level 2. And if you know how to fight the tassel worms, you should be okay. Once again, get them out of the ground with the arrows. The arrows will knock them out of the ground. Heavy attacks will knock them out of the ground, slam the ground. and of course Atreus' bow will get them out of the ground as well. So from there you want to freeze them and do as much damage as you can, but just be cognizant of the fact that there is a Draugr that is firing projectiles at us at this moment. You can fire projectiles back at him should you choose to, it's entirely up to you. You can even throw your axe at him if you want to get rid of him, but I'm just going to kind of micromanage. But here in this area is one of the trickier puzzles in the game. It is a puzzle that might not be completely obvious to a lot of people. It wasn't obvious to me. I scratched my head over it for a while, but once you do it, you get a talisman that is arguably one of the most important talismans for dealing damage on this difficulty, in my opinion. And it's skill-based as well, so you don't have to feel filthy about it. You don't look at it as something that's cheesy and cheap and that you only use to, to kind of win. You can look at it as something that rewards you for skill-based timing. And in an action game such as this, the only thing that's you should be getting rewarded with is with skill-based timing, in my opinion. It should all be founded on that. Success should come through you, not through having some kind of win button. But the good news here is, if you have good timing, you're going to get a form of a win button, and it comes in the guise of the Amulet of Kvasir. Oh, I don't know how you pronounce it. That's probably how I'm going to say it. I'm just going to say the amulet, and hopefully you're going to know what I mean. And it's going to be taking priority over all the things you can equip. However, it isn't a jack of all trades, because there will be certain circumstances where if you want to squeeze a bit more strength, or if you want to squeeze a bit more runic, or if you want to do something of that nature, you can certainly take it off for a little while. But on certain enemies, it will be a really, really useful tool. And you might wonder, well, what does it do? And it's important. So when you dodge in this game, or when you block in this game, you are afforded quite a large window of safety when you do that, right? So parrying is very easy to do, blocking is even more easy to do, and the dodge, unless you get screwed by an AoE or some kind of interesting hitbox, is always generally going to be quite powerful and quite rewarding and keep you safe. Well, with the amulet on, if you dodge at the last possible moment, and it's a pretty strict timing for God of War, it must be said, you will activate a slow motion mode. Very similar to Bayonetta. And in that moment, depending on how upgraded your talisman is, your amulet, or whatever you want to call it, will dictate how long the slow motion can last for. And this will work against the enemies, this will work against the bosses, this will work against anything that you can dodge with precise timing. The only problem with this particular tool is that the timing is quite tight, that you have to dodge things in a very deliberate, specific way. A good example will be the boss that we'll be taking on in Alfheim. He is the leader of the Dark Elves, and he has this maneuver where he runs at you with his blinding staff, and he slams it into the ground. And it's quite a slow move, with lots of telegraphing, does a lot of damage, it blinds you, it's unblockable until he does the one that's blockable, which makes no fucking sense, but we'll get to that when it happens. To dodge that and get the buff from the amulet, you have to dodge backwards. Dodging left or right or into it seemed to be very, very difficult to do to proc the actual activation. However, if you dodge backwards, because you're still in the active hitbox, it seems to give it you a little bit more willingly. And it can be kind of fiddly with some things, and it leads to certain things being more usable than others. Like, there are certain attacks that you perhaps don't want to dodge to get the slow motion, and then there are ones that you do. A good example of this would be the Traveller. Getting slow motion off the Traveller's overheads, very difficult to do. So difficult that you'll spend more time killing yourself than you will probably getting the timing for it, unless you get really good at that. His horizontal stripes, however, really useful. His running red thrust, also really easy to get the slow motion from. But it just kind of becomes a setup of how you want to deal with it. Because the breathing room that the amulet gives you is very important, but it comes with limitations. The one thing you need to know about this piece of kit is that you can still take damage in it, which is really, really stupid to me, and it kind of shows Santa Monica's inexperience with this mechanic, in my opinion. But you can dodge a swing and recover at the edge of your dodge and still be on the hitbox, and you will take damage in slow motion. And I'll never understand how this ever comes to be in video games, because you could do this in Nier Automata, and it was one of the weakest areas of that game's combat, and it happens in this game. And I'll never understand it, because the idea of a precise dodge to be rewarded with a moment of advantageous position should never be punished. It's just dumb. In the moment that amulet hits off, all hitboxes should be turned off. There should be no possible hurtbox happening right in that moment. It just shouldn't exist. But it does. So you need to be careful, because it doesn't stop time, it slows time. So for instance, if an enemy's doing an attack, and they're right at the fulcrum, right, you know, at that focal point of that attack, and it's coming close to your body, if you touch it, you will take a hit. But at the same time, if you dodge it correctly, even in the slow motion, you can get additional slow motion. So it does work both ways, and it can be very useful, and you just saw it just then. This is why this move is powerful, because it enables you to get executioner cleaves in opportunities you normally wouldn't. And the heavy Draugr is a great example of this, because his horizontal swing is one of the easiest moves in the game to get the slow motion from. And if you can get good at it from him, you'll have an advantage going into the toughest boss fight in the game, which is a gank fight against two brothers, and one of them essentially has the heavy Draugr horizontal attack. So if you can get the timing, you can wreck him, and you can hopefully have a much more comfortable time than I did on my first playthrough. But we've come over here to the beach with our new ability. Once again, guys, I am going to be exploring quite a lot in this walkthrough for the purposes of getting resources. Because the game is so vast, and because I don't have any kind of encyclopedia to look at to confirm where I found things, I have to just kind of experiment and hope I get the resources I'm looking for. The good news in a walkthrough such as this is, because hindsight is a powerful thing, I can trim out the moments of exploration that didn't bear fruit, and I can keep in the ones that did. And that's pretty much what I'm going to be doing, guys. There will be plenty of exploration that I did do that you're not going to see, but because it doesn't make that much of a difference in this game, because you don't overtly level in a conventional way, you don't have to worry about, you know, I'm getting strong off camera and you're not strong enough to follow the strategies, because the game just doesn't really function that way. As I get snuck up on here by a Tatzelworm, and Atreus helps me out with a couple of combos. Always fun to see. I'm a big advocate of using the heavy, unhanded charge move, just because it has good knockback against the Tatzelworms. But the safest way to fight them, guys, is to launch them. Launch them and then combo them. That's going to get a lot easier to do, and a lot easier to capitalize on once you get the Blades of Chaos. So, look forward to that. Somebody in a comment mentioned that I should give spoiler warnings before I talk about spoilers. I'm sorry, guys. This is a walkthrough. If you don't want to be spoiled on the game, you shouldn't be watching. It's not my prerogative to say spoiler alert. It's your prerogative not to watch. And I know that might sound callous and rude, but it's true. You know, I can't be held at the whims of what you do not know. It's just that simple. And I'm sorry if I've spoiled it for anybody, but in this day and age, you really should know better. I've only said that 1,000 times in walkthroughs, and it's true, you know? It's just one of those things. Please don't watch if you haven't played. Pretty simple, right? But we get some treasure off the chest. I was tempted to trim some of the chest openings, but I do quite like the animation. And we get the Frost Giant's Frenzy, which is going to be my go-to heavy attack, seeing as I'm going to miss my favourite heavy attack in the game. Which is kind of silly too, because I was looking on the internet to see whether or not I could go back and get it, and you can't get back to where the chest is, but apparently the blacksmiths will sell runic attacks that you miss. However, they don't sell it. They refuse to sell it for the full duration of the game, so I never got the move that is incredibly powerful, dirty, cheap, and amazing. But I'll tell you where it is, and you better pick it up, because it's going to give you a really, really easy time for most of the stuff. And I don't know the name of it, guys, but it's the axe buff. There is a technique in this game, it's a heavy runic attack, where Kratos buffs the axe, and when you hit people, it does a shockwave on the axe, and it stuns them. And it stuns everything, stuns bosses, stuns giant things, it stuns all the cast. So if you come up against a lone ogre or a lone troll, something like that, you can just wail on him while it lasts, because he can't do anything, because he's perpetually stunned. It's incredibly powerful at building stun. It's incredibly powerful at just dicking enemies that were dicking you, and it works on bosses. And I got to the part where the puzzle was, and I ended up having to end my session for whatever reason, I can't remember now. And then when I came back to it, I completely forgot that I'd not done it. So I just moved on with the game and carried on recording, and then I couldn't go back. So I'm going to miss it, and I'm going to lament it too, because it's very powerful. But the good news is, the next run that I'm going to be doing with this game will not let me use runic attacks, so it was good practice for that. but once you spin this wheel, you're going to get attacked by a second wave of Dark Elves. And the strategy for the Dark Elves is very simple. When they're not elites, they can be frozen with your axe if you use the heavy throw. And then from there you can proceed to knock them off the edge or kick them into walls. Pretty useful for situations like this. And of course, watch out for being shot at by other Dark Elves. But he's off the edge. I feel like they might have worked a little bit with the collision of people falling off, because at launch, it didn't seem to feel right. Like, you would kick people near edges and they would just hit the invisible walls, and it didn't seem to flow the same. So I'd be very curious to see whether or not the detection is just spotty or if they did any work to it. Because they definitely changed some of the HP values and some of the damage values on the enemies. Because when you first played this game back at launch, everything took a beating, everything took incredible amounts of punishment, and it didn't matter who they were. They could be the skinniest, scrawniest looking dude, they could be projectile guy up on a mountain who just shouldn't take any damage, and they were all hulks. It was nuts. But a little bit more exploration there leads to an elevator. The elevator takes you down, and then immediately we're thrown into another fight against some Dark Elves. But you'll notice there's a lot of really intelligently placed pitfalls. And Atreus is already jumping on people, which is awesome, doing the advanced combat. Here's the 2-hit combo. That maneuver, that's a running attack. Whenever you see the Dark Elves running at you, just block. Unless you know the timing of it, just block, because they'll do an incredibly fast forward thrust. It's one of the fastest moves in the game. It's the same move that the Frosty dudes do when they run towards you. It's a really quick thrust. That right there is a double hitter. Get really good at that move. Whenever you see them telegraph in the air that big swing, and they'll come and do 2 hits, get very good at dodging that if you could, because it's going to pay dividends against the boss. The boss has the exact same animation, and if you know how to punish it, you will just demolish him. As we just demolished his friend there. But keep on picking up the stuff, exploring, finding what you can, tooling out Kratos in the way that you like. And this leads me to the discussion of builds, which is something that I've meant to speak about and I probably haven't touched on enough, which people might be curious of. So if you press the right analog stick when you're in the menu, it will tell you what the stats do. And the stats don't necessarily do what you think they're supposed to do. It's not quite as cut and dried as one would think. For instance, luck, I believe, gives you more experience and gives you more hack silver, which is kind of interesting, right, that a statistic would govern how much money you find. But there you go, this game is very RPG-y. So when you look at the statistics and what they do, it gives you an idea of what you want to go towards, and everybody's going to go towards different things. Certain things are going to be more viable than other things, and my intention with this walkthrough was to make a walkthrough so that the build didn't necessarily matter, so that you could tailor it around whatever you like to do, and you just take the strategies that I'm implementing and you implement them into your own play. As the motorcycle says hello, and that generally results in the best kind of walkthrough in my opinion, because it doesn't force you to play a different way, it augments your ability to play and hopefully opens your eyes to some new things. And it's all good, right? Well, there are objectively better builds in this game, I kind of feel, having played it as much as I have at this moment. And it's not the ones that I'm going to generally be going towards. So as a player, I always like to prioritize damage first over everything. I would rather die from one touch from everything and do good damage than be able to take a bunch of hits and have to hit things for several hours. That to me is the epitome of boredom and bad design. I like to be vulnerable, but I like to feel powerful. And you can feel powerful. There you go, a nice reversal of the front of that sentence. You can feel powerful in this game, but it generally only happens when you use runic attacks, I've noticed. On this difficulty anyway. All of my observations, guys, are based on Give Me God of War, because I haven't played this game on any other difficulty. I can't tell you how it feels on Give Me a Challenge or Give Me an Experience, because I wouldn't know. But I know this difficulty, and I know it a lot now. And runic attacks seem to be the only time where you truly feel strong. Another time when you do feel strong is when you do this. But that's a different thing entirely. You're using mechanics there to circumvent the HP pools. But get the right runic attack, get the right equipment on, do it against a boss or a tough enemy, and watch the HP. And that's when you realise that nothing that you do, conventionally, is going to do the same kind of damage. It just isn't. There is an ability for the runic attacks to just supersede all the damage you can do, and it's very similar to the Executioner's Cleave. The reason I love the Executioner's Cleave so much is because it affords me the ability to deal way more damage than I ever could. And normally in God of War, you would never see me doing a super slow charge move, because it's not something that the games really did that much of, other than maybe the launcher, but then that had utility that you needed. In the old games, you would always be comboing. You know, triangle into square, square into triangle, square, square, triangle. You know, bunch of squares into this, you know, mega plume. Things of that nature. You would always be generally doing some kind of combo on an enemy. Doing some kind of hit, blocking, parrying, doing some kind of hit, blocking, parrying, and then killing the enemy with the circle prompt. Because that's the flow of that game. Whereas in this game, you can do that where you mash on them and you do all kinds of different combinations of hold attacks, charge attacks, changing weapons mid-combo, using Atreus, using, you know, the stuns and the bounces and the juggles and things. But you're not doing much damage. And in the time that you've messed around doing all the fancy combos and knocking them around, you didn't hurt them enough, and they might have even hit through your attack and damaged you. So it puts you in situations where you could bounce people around and swap weapons, and I'm going to do that. There's going to be plenty of instances of me doing, you know, different combinations of setups for moves and things. But the Executioner's Cleave and the runic attacks will always outdamage even your most ambitious of efforts. So the juggles generally become only really viable and only really necessary against enemies in the air. An enemy that you can launch is going to be great to mess around juggling and doing damage to, because you're going to do more damage to them because they're in the air. That's one of the bonuses that you get. But then you come up against the heavy Draugr. How the fuck do you balance him? You know, you can't bounce him, you can't juggle him. The only thing that juggles that enemy and puts them in the air is Rage of the Spartans, and I'm not using it. And I say I'm not using it. There will be instances where I do use it, but my theory and my hope when I was making the walkthrough was that I would not use it that often. There are always going to be moments where I think using it's going to be key, but for the most, I tried not to use it, and I only used it on fights that I didn't like. And there was a few fights I don't like that I didn't use it on. Like, I don't use it on any of the bosses. I use it on, for instance, the ones where you're protecting the platform and there's a time limit and it throws a bunch of Reavers at you and a bunch of Revenants at you and normal dudes, and you've got no time to deal with all of them. I used it, for instance, on a moment like that, because that, to me, is terribly designed. And I use it to circumvent moments such as that. But that's the only way you can launch those fat guys, and everything else doesn't work. So it puts you in a situation of, you prioritise the heavier damages, and the best way to prioritise heavier damages is to go towards Runic, because Runic increases elemental damage. And the elemental damage is generally what happens when you use runic attacks. It's got a massive basis in the elemental side, and the stats will tell you this. They'll tell you if it's stun, if it's damage, or if it's runic, and a lot of them have a lot of heavy runic influences. By the way, guys, this is a scripted section if you're wondering. I've just gone on about how I don't use rage. Well, this is a moment where the game wants you to use rage. It's part of some kind of sequence, and the checkpoint here is not the best either. So if you take damage on the next fight, you will go back to before you even jumped up to that part just then and activated the Rage of the Gods. So kind of frustrating, but what can you do? Anyhow, here is the fight where you don't want to take damage because of aforementioned bad checkpoint, but the good news is it's only 2 of these enemies. Interestingly enough, these enemies have the same moveset as the boss. So if you can get good at these kind of more elite or more generalized enemy, I don't know what you would call them, they're like advanced soldiers, maybe they're captains, but they have the boss's moveset. And I sillily allowed this one to become an elite, which is a bad idea because it means that he's going to be a bit of a pain in the dick. But a couple things to know. The move that you see just there, where they run at you, is parryable, and it will break your guard, but it will not damage you. If you block it, they fall back knackered for some reason, and I don't really understand why they do it. At first I thought it was because Atreus shoots them with an arrow and it weakens them, but then after that there's times when they do it anyway. So if you want to practice the timing on dodging that move or parrying that move, that's all good. But if you just block it, you will get a massive opening and a stun on the enemy almost every time, so it's well worth doing. But being comfortable with this move and understanding it is key to being able to fight the boss later on. Did you notice just then that I was able to freeze the enemy when Atreus was grabbing him? That's an example of what you can do when Atreus grabs people. It's such a powerful thing, but there doesn't seem to be a way to command it. It's very unfortunate. Like, ooh, there you go, that's an interesting move. That's one of the rare moves you don't see too much of. And that's the blinding effect that you might not be aware of. So, the blinding effect sucks. But luckily enough, it didn't cost me too much. And the reason that I didn't restart that fight, guys, and go for no damage, because it is a really simple fight, is because the checkpoint is bad. That's the only reason. That and the fact that it's an easy fight. Like, there are a lot of fights in this game where I'm going to take damage, where I know I can no damage them, and it's just a matter of time, but it's not important to me. There are a couple of fights that it was very important to me for me to take no damage in, and it was generally some of the harder fights in the game. Because if you can do those, you can do anything, right? That's kind of my feeling for that kind of design. But going back to the build, Runic is a really, really good option to go towards because it will make your frost attacks better and it will make your immolation better as well when you get the fire weapon. Those elements do increase damage, they do damage over the time, they do all kinds of wonderful things. So, as it stands, as far as really strong, really viable, and really dirty builds go, I think the best build in the game is going to be a Runic build that focuses on cooldown. Because it will enable you to spam Runic moves, and Runic moves are the most powerful moves in the game. They do damage that you can only dream of by doing standard attacks. And there are also addendums to this where there are certain pieces of equipment that make Runic attacks really even more powerful than they already are. And you can make some really interesting setups that can give you a massive advantage. So that is definitely something you want to be looking at, guys, even though I'm not going to be guiding you down that path. By the way, that was the backwards dodge against that maneuver. Very important to know the timing of that. Here's me getting rid of some of the Runic attacks, so I can get them on cooldown, and then getting rid of that guy thanks to the axe throw. Always good. That's important as well, what he just did there. Do you see that animation? Where he twirls in the air, and then he does the yellow ring, and then he does one swing, that move just then. Not only can you interrupt that when he's doing that if you hit it correctly, but it's really, really good to know that move, because once again, the boss will use that move. And there is a fight later on where you take on 2 of the bosses at the same time, and it's the hardest fight in the game. Oh, by the way, be careful if you wake up the Ancient at a bad time. Kind of funny that that can happen, but you want to just use this piece of cover to throw your axe. Just use the third-person cover trick to throw the axe at him, and be very careful of those stupid chunks that fall off. Whoever designed those stupid chunks to explode after a certain amount of time is a person that I want to have a very disagreeable conversation with, because I find it to be fucking stupid. I really do. It's such a stupid bullshit thing, and I can't even begin to understand who thinks it's good. Like, the only way I can think of it as being a good mechanic is if it did incredible damage to the boss when he stood on it and stunned him or something. But I don't know if it does that. In my experience, all it does is make me flinch when I'm trying to damage him, and it's really frustrating. Because I've had fights where I've done incredible things, and then at the end of them, I've took damage off the fucking Ancient chunks. Like, massive fights against multiple enemies, crazy dodges, crazy parries, you know, feats of actual skill. And then when I'm going in for the killing blow on the shitty Ancient, I get chip damage. Ugh. Like, right now, you'll notice I'm being really passive against those chips because I don't want to take damage. Ironically enough, even though my HP bar shows that I have taken damage, which I took damage in the previous fight, so it's inherited, and I don't mind that. But there is a glitch in this game where you can start off a checkpoint and the game damages you when you weren't damaged. So you can start from a checkpoint with less HP than maximum, which is really strange. And I love that it's giving me tooltips. It's like, dude, pick up the chunks. It's like, I know you can pick the chunks up. Watch this, by the way. Look at this. How weird is that? That was bizarre. For some reason, there is a weird, either it's an invisible wall or some kind of manipulation there from physics, but it moves the axe. The axe did not throw where I threw it. And we have visual proof, just like Darkside Phil has when he's blocking, right? Anyway, the Ancient's having a pretty tough time, and it spawned more of the Dark Elves, so we can proceed to smash them about. A nice piece of advice against this particular enemy: if you're not confident in doing the one circle dodge to get the amulet activation, double tap it. Because you won't generally get the activation, although sometimes you can, but you'll do the roll, and the roll seems to have more iframes in it than the standard dodge. So when in doubt, when you're trying to do a tight dodge, double tap dodge, so that even if you miss the timing, you'll get the roll and it'll give you safety. It's one of the best pieces of advice I can give you. You're probably already doing it without realizing. There is a lot of instinctual, learned mechanics like that. Like, you might have even got it from something like a Souls game, where in a Souls game, because you know that the buffering can be a problem, and because you know that the inputs can be a problem, and various things of that nature, when you dodge certain things, you might double tap just for safety. Oh, the axe has been weird again. It's one of those things that they do in fighting games to guarantee that they get the move that they want. There is a technique known as pianoing, which is just simply to double tap a button rather quickly when you press them. And it's one of those things that's very foreign and alien and awkward at first, and then when you get used to it, it becomes very simple. It becomes programmed part of your behaviour. But now that we've stunned him, we can proceed to do the minigame, which you'd think it'd do more damage when we're standing on the core of this creature, but at times it often doesn't. So my personal opinion for that moment is to charge the Executioner's Axe and then go into the grab. It seems to be the best way of damaging them. But there's something you need to know, guys, about the Ancients. I think you can only hit them 3 times and they start recovering. There's some kind of failsafe against you wailing on them while they're stunned. And I think it's interesting that they've put that in there, because that can be a really, really interesting tactic, and a tactic that I would have liked in a game, where when you put someone in a stunned state, you can either grab them, or you can proceed to do as much damage to them as you possibly can, and then grab them. And you've seen me do this dozens of times in games like Bloodborne and Dark Souls 3, where when you land a kind of interrupt or a parry in those games, you can proceed to do something like a fully charged R2 into a transformation attack, into a visceral, because you can cancel the latter edges of the move into the latter edges of the detection on the visceral. And then of course in Dark Souls 3 you can do the same thing with a couple of R2s or jump attacks or whatever you want to do, and then right at the end of your recovery, boom, you do the riposte. And it's the same concept here, only he will stand up and you'll lose your opportunity to grab him. But thank you very much for watching. You take care now.